Cool. Okay. Welcome to Proper Topper Virtual Book Club. We started this, Tara started this with an idea at the very beginning of pandemic when we were shut down and lonely and missing conversations with our community. We started this book club, and it was a nice way of taking our minds off of the anxieties that we were building during COVID. And a silver lining has been that we've had the opportunity to invite authors of the books we've chosen to join us. And we've had people from wherever in the world they are joining us. It's been lovely. And this time, it was a really lovely surprise that Katherine, whose book we had already chosen, happens to live right down the way in Bethesda. So that was a nice little bit of serendipity. And we've had several of those with this book, including the fact that Katherine's husband has exactly the same name as Tara, who you remember from having the idea for book club a minute ago. Tara's father has the same name as Katherine's husband. So we think that's all very fascinating. One of my favorite things as a lifelong reader has been finding books where I get the feeling as I'm reading that the author and I might end up really getting to know each other and be friends. So that's been a really cool thing about having authors come talk to us and get to know them and talk to them and feel like maybe they're part of our community. This book, I think, really hit the right note with me, because as we've all gotten used to all of the anxieties we've had for the last 2 years, we've recently had the added anxiety and concern and horror of what's unfolding in Ukraine. This book for me was a nice way to crawl into Katherine's world of her interesting, quirky, funny, relatable characters and be reminded of a normal time and the ways that small interactions and quirky, interesting turns of events, often unexpected, can chart our lives and the paths that we follow. And it's just really was a comforting, really enjoyable read for me. And so I'm so excited to be able to welcome Katherine Heiny, the author of this beautiful book, and my friend Eun Yang, who is the earliest morning riser I know, and who has kindly agreed to join us, even though she has to get up at 2 a.m. So we're going to try to keep this lively so that it's worth Eun's very late night time here. So now I would love to introduce Eun, who will introduce Katherine. Turning it over to you, Eun.
All right, thank you so much, Anna. I've known Anna for so long. She is a dear friend and a dear heart, and I love Proper Topper so much. There are so many stores out there, but there is something very intimate and personal about Proper Topper and shopping there, not just knowing Anna, but what you curate and the joy that it brings me. So thank you, especially in these times of the pandemic, to have local stores that are staying open and making deliveries and providing personal service that shows that you care has been so meaningful. So you know how I feel about Proper Topper, Anna. Katherine, Anna told me when she asked me to do this that, you know, because of my crazy early morning schedule and my 3 kids, that she wanted to give me plenty of time to read the book. So I was like, okay, it's just plenty of time. But then I picked it up and I think it was one weekend. And I have 3 teenagers and I work up in the middle of the night and there's Netflix. But I wanted to read this book and I read it quickly. And exactly what Anna said, the characters draw you in. And I love funny. And here's this poignant story, and it's just funny. The characters are funny, the situations are funny, and you just can't believe it. So thank you for writing this book to make us laugh also. Think about our relationships and the paths we take, but to make us laugh, it's so important. So it's so great to have you and so great to talk to you about this book. I don't know, should we get started with you talking about how you came about this book? Did you want to read a passage, the passage that might resonate with you, that in terms of what you want to read to us as the readers here in the audience?
I can read a short passage, but it amuses me that you said Netflix, because usually when I am on tour, I thank the audience for coming and saying, I know how easy it is, how nice it is to stay home in your pajamas and watch Netflix. And once a woman in the front row said, and drink gin straight from the bottle. And I'm like, well, I'm coming home with you. But sure, I can give a quick reading just from near the beginning of the book. Does that sound okay?
Great, yes.
The main character, Jane, is a school teacher, a second grade school teacher, and Duncan is her boyfriend. In mid-November, Jane had parent-teacher conferences, and even though most of the parents of her students were concerned and loving and valued education, she was still anxious. All parents want to hear good things about their children, but sometimes you had to say bad things. If you said the bad things too subtly, the parents didn't believe you. If you said the bad things too boldly, the parents got upset. Actually, they often didn't believe you, and then they got upset anyway. It was like having an intervention for an alcoholic every 20 minutes for an entire working day. Another stressful element of parent-teacher conferences was that sometimes Jane got a little insight into her students' lives that she'd rather not have. Like when Crystal Orr's father asked what grade this was, and when Jane told him second grade, he said, "Wow, Crystal's in second already?" Or when Seth Dorsey's mother asked what would happen if, hypothetically, a parent did a student's math homework. Jane told her that parents who did their children's homework were preventing their children from learning. "What would happen though?" Seth's mother asked. Jane said if it became a regular thing, she would have to involve the principal. "What if you couldn't prove it though?" Seth's mother continued. "What if the child denied it?" Brianna Wooten's mother let the class hamster out of its cage without asking and spent almost the entire conference dashing around the classroom calling, "Cuthbert, Cuthbert, I need you to listen to me." Jane only had a minute there at the end to tell her that she thought Brianna might have had some attention deficit issues. And Kenny Parrish's father told her indignantly that Kenny could definitely read at a second grade level because he could tell the difference between Foster's Lager and Foster's Special Bitter when asked to fetch one from the fridge. After the last conference, Duncan brought Jane her own beer from a cooler in his van and held her feet on his lap and gave her a foot rub, massaging her insteps with hard, smooth strokes. It was actually better than sex in a way, because really, how often do you sit around thinking, "I'm so tired, I wish someone would come have sex with me"? All the time, Duncan said when she told him this. "I literally think that all the time." And so they did that too, right there in the classroom with the door shut and the lights off. And for weeks after, Jane felt horribly guilty whenever she looked at the Peter Rabbit rug.
I muted myself because I was laughing through that because I remember that passage so clearly. Because don't we know these parents? Don't we know them? Don't we have these parents in our lives, in our communities? And you just think, is it me? Is it I'm doing something wrong? So that really cracked me up. And we'll just begin with, how did you even come up with this book? Where did it start for you? The characters, the place, there's so many parts of the book that come together so wonderfully.
Well, I wanted to set a book in Boyne City, and I actually set a novel there about a brother and sister who hire somebody to get in an accident with their elderly mother because they want her to stop driving. So they want her to have this like expensive, non-fatal car crash. But I couldn't make that novel work. But the man that they hired was Duncan. And I really liked him as a character. And I liked this idea of this very laid back local Lothario, but a good person also. He was just very interesting to me. So I saved him and then I started the book over. And I knew I wanted to tell it from the new woman in his life who would have to deal with his legion of ex-girlfriends.
So you started off with that one episode and then built out from there, which is interesting. So you liked Duncan first. I was going to ask you about Jane first. Should we start with Duncan since you mentioned him?
Sure.
So I had such a conflicted view of Duncan. because you could feel his charm, his easy way, how he knew everybody. He was so helpful and kind. But then I felt for Jane, because having to see every person you've ever slept with and having to wonder if every single woman you've encountered has now slept, and whether she was young, old, whatever walk of life, I think that might have been challenging.
Well, I don't think Jane had to wonder. I think the answer was always yes, he had slept with her. But I think that Duncan is very transparent, and I think that he would actually be easy to be married to, because I think he's so laid back, and he's very honest, and he's very loving. And I don't think those are the qualities that makes Jane originally fall in love with him. I think she falls in love with him because he's sexy and exciting, but she ends up learning about the other side of him.
Yeah, and also very reliable. I felt like he was just this reliable person in her life, in many ways, and when she didn't have anyone else like that. And what about Jane? Why is she a teacher? I somehow, this idea that when she's up early, and I appreciate teachers because they have to get all these things done before everyone else joins in. And I feel like that in my job sometimes. Can you talk about her personality and her role as a teacher in the book too?
Well, I was just starting the new novel, and my son's third grade teacher told me, we were living in the Netherlands, and they were going to the American School of The Hague. And his third grade teacher told me that the Dutch DEA had come to break down the door of their neighbors because their neighbors were growing and selling marijuana, but they got the address wrong. So they kicked down the teacher's door. And she was at school, and her husband was at school because he's a teacher also. And they had to go home and deal with their broken in front door and the angry Dutch DEA. And it was pajama day. So they had to go home and do it in their pajamas. And I thought that was like the best thing the best story in the world. So it was just like, boom, Jane's going to be a teacher. And I said it in second grade because I think that 7-year-olds are really hilarious because they're very articulate, but they still can't do anything for themselves. So it's like, I don't know, that struck me as a hilarious crossover point. And actually, it was a very arbitrary decision, but the classroom scenes wound up being some of my favorite to write.
And they were some of the funniest as a mom, and having been around small kids, and that 7 is such a cute, sweet age. They're still dependent on you, and they still like you, and they still look up to you, and they haven't quite reached the sass age. It's a very sweet and a little bit independent, but you're right. But you still have to hold their hands through much of life. And what about Boyne City? I felt like that was its own character, this whole community of small town feel where everyone knows everyone. People show up at each other's doors, good or bad.
Well, I grew up in Midland, Michigan, and we always vacationed in northern Michigan. And then about 20 years ago, my husband and I bought a summer house in Boyne City to give our son some more stability because we moved around a lot. And it's just so beautiful. They have the most beautiful sunsets, the most beautiful beaches of anywhere in the world. In fact, when we finished the book, I had to go through and like take out sunsets because there was basically one like every other page. But it's a very small town. And when we first moved there, we didn't have internet. So I would go over to my neighbor's house every night and with my phone and check my email by hooking onto his internet. And after like the third night, one of the other neighbors said, "Why are you going over to Ralph's house in your nightgown every night at 10 o'clock? And I was like, oh, it's a small town. They watch us. And it is a small town, but it has so, all the good and the bad of that. And my children they both took their first steps there. They learned to ride bikes there, and they had their first summer jobs there. And when they interviewed for their summer jobs at this pizza place called Boyne City Pizza, the manager asked my older son how fast he was on a scale of 1 to 10. And Angus was like, ooh, 5, maybe a 5.5. And the fact that they hired him anyway is like That's like the essence of Boyne City to me. So it will forever be one of my favorite places.
Mhm. The sunset descriptions, I wanted to go and be by the water and the lake and the picnic areas and all of that. And the characters are so interesting and I think richly developed. Jimmy especially was interesting to me, and why you brought him into Jane's life and what you wanted to do with his character. Can you talk to us about Jimmy and the sweet man that he is?
Well, Jimmy sort of was another arbitrary decision. Early on in the book, Jane has a dinner party, because dinner parties that don't go well are my favorite things to write about in all the world. And so I was looking for people she would have at this first dinner party, and I thought Duncan would bring an assistant from his woodworking shop. But one of the themes running throughout the novel is that Duncan is a horrible business manager and has a horrible working model of a business. So I didn't think whoever worked for him would be like a particular go-getter. So I chose Jimmy, and I decided to have him be sort of intellectually disabled. But it was very, very important to me that throughout the book, he be shown as a kind and a decent man, and complex and really worthy of love, not just worthy of pity, and that he add to Jane's life. In many ways, Jimmy was really the heart of the book for me, even though he came in as a secondary character, but he really moved onto stage very swiftly, I think.
Mm-hmm. And to that point, I mean, there were a couple, I'm hoping that everyone read the book but I'm not sure, so I don't want to ruin anything. But, the two significant events in Jimmy's life, portrayed in the book, just broke my heart so much. I don't want to give it away, but, and it really spoke to his resilience though. And I just want to compliment you on the way the book ended, because, I thought, I don't want to give anything away. Just the way it ended with him in a prominent position, as you said, with Jane, I felt was just a touching, moving, and unexpected ending in the last few words and sentences in that book. So I really enjoyed seeing Jimmy's character develop. I feel like I have to ask about more characters, like Frida and her folk music, and just her whole persona, so different from Jane's, and what she added to the character, and the dinner parties and the conversation.
Well, my godfather plays the ukulele more or less constantly, which when my children were little, they were like, this is our dream come true. There's a man sitting in a corner playing a ukulele and he knows so many songs. And when I first brought my husband home, he was my boyfriend, to meet my parents and my godparents came out to the airport to meet us. And my godfather had written a song especially for the occasion, and he brought his ukulele. And we got off the plane and they sang the song, and like he had song sheets, so other people joined in. I don't know why my husband didn't just get back on a plane, and he must have thought I'd never had a boyfriend before. I don't know. So, but the funny thing is that I was writing all this about Frida, and then I was telling my editor a story about my godfather, and she was like, oh, so that's where Frida came from. And it obviously is, but I hadn't thought of that. So sometimes it's even surprising to the writer how much matches up with real life.
Do you remember the song? I feel like I need to hear the song, and
the song was, he rewrote the lyrics to Yankee Doodle, I guess because my husband is British. So, okay. But it was personalized lyrics. Yeah.
These are great stories. I love that story. And I feel like I have to ask about Aggie. Was such an interesting person in Duncan's life, and then became a part of Jane's life. And then Gary, like I still, to the end of the book, I'm like, do I still understand why she's with Gary? Am I missing something? Please help me understand Gary.
I think that she's with Gary because he does whatever she says. I think she has successfully infantilized Gary over the years, like, I think she couldn't control Duncan, and that's why they got divorced. So Gary, she can control. And after my agent read the book the first time, she was like, what is wrong with Gary? And I was like, nobody really knows. And that's when there's a place where in the book where Jane's mother is like, is Gary an alcoholic? And Jane's like, no, that's just him. And it was very funny because later in the book, Gary has a health scare, and I wanted him to have this health scare, but I didn't want it to be serious. And I thought, well, maybe it could be something based on Gary being so sort of bewildered and unobservant. And I'm like, I'm writing that exact part of the book. And my husband goes to play squash, and he calls me and says they're going to the ER because the squash partner was having blurred vision and dizzy spells. So I'm like, okay, call me from the ER. So he calls me from the ER and says that the blurred vision and the dizzy spells were caused because his squash partner was wearing his wife's bifocals instead of his squash glasses. And I was like, I don't even need to change anything. That can go straight in the book. Sometimes when you're finishing a book, it seems like the world is helping you do that. Like the world is offering up instance and help to you. And it's a really, really exciting feeling.
And is that how you, if I was going to ask you about your writing routine, when these things come to you, do you take notes? Do you take pictures? How you just remember all these events and happenings and funny vignettes and characters and people that you meet and stories? How does that work for you when you're writing?
I do have a pretty good memory. I don't keep a journal because when I looked back, I used to keep journals, but I realized I only kept them during like lonely, depressed parts of my life. Instead, like that's when you're home writing in your journal. When you're happy and going out, you don't have that so much. So, but the farther you get into a book, the more the characters become themselves, and then they're really speaking to you. Mm. And there's a scene very late in the book where Jane's mother explains her menopause to Duncan. And I remember writing that scene sort of late at night and then going upstairs and waking my husband and being like, Jane's mother just said the funniest thing. I have to tell you what it is. So, I mean, writing a novel is like, it's like a train picking up speed. In the beginning, it's very slow. And then the second half tends to go pretty quickly with the momentum.
And did the pandemic change anything for you in terms of your writing? How did it shape the way you approach writing? We had a lot of time to think and sit and watch Netflix.
I watched a lot of Netflix. It's weird because I've always thought that books were my like go-to comfort thing, but during lockdown especially, well, I could only read Little House on the Prairie, but I watched so much TV, and I had lunch after lockdown was over with another writer, and every single show she brought up, I was like, I watched that. I watched every episode of that. But I did find it hard to write in the beginning of the pandemic. I had a lot of ideas and I would take notes, but I had almost no fluency at the keyboard. And I think it was because, well, obviously world events were like sort of fracturing everybody's brain. But I think it was also because I didn't have the stimulation of random encounters. And shortly before the pandemic, I was at the dog park with one of our dogs, and I was talking to this man who was there with his dog, and he gave his dog a 10-minute warning when it was time to leave the dog park, and not in a like playful or ironic way. And it was just so great. And it made me so happy, and it made me want to go home and write, even though I wasn't writing about that. And I think it was hard on writers everywhere not to have other people stimulating this sort of desire to write.
Oh, that's such a good point. Have you been venturing out more? Have you had more recent encounters as things start to slowly get back into the swing of things?
Well, we had our this is so prosaic. We had our toilet was blocked up. So we had the plumber came out and he put the drain snake in and it went in like 30 feet and something snapped it off. And I was like, I'm almost certain it was an alligator. And he was like, no, it was a root. Like he took it, he was so literal that it made me just super happy. But he came back with this special camera and poked it all the way down there. And it was not an alligator or a root. It was some weird, awful thing called a fatberg, like an iceberg that floats around. I can't even, I'm talking about this, but
It sounds
um,
cool.
yeah.
And that happened to you in real life. Someone came to your home and this happened.
Yeah. Yesterday.
Yesterday?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I love it. Before I continue, I just want to let everyone know that if you have a question for Katherine, if you would put it in the chat, then when we get a little further into our conversation, we can, I can ask those questions. So please put your questions in the chat. Thank you. And what about your approach to, you were telling us about how this particular novel came to be from that one story and the characters moving out and of course, Point City. How do you approach a novel versus a short story? In some ways, I feel like that might be harder to write because you have to be very judicious in the words that you choose to make the story what it is in such a short time, in a short space, I should say.
Well, I actually started my writing life out as a poet. And so I think that I liked poems because they were short and I could stay in control of them. And then I moved on to short stories. And I really felt for many, many years that a novel was something that I couldn't do, that it was just too long and too intimidating. And there's this great quote by Laurie Moore where she says that a short story is like a love affair and a novel is like a marriage. And I think a short story is like a party and a novel is like a family reunion where you have to keep seeing everyone in their bathrobes. It has the good and the bad. I have to say that when I finished writing Early Morning Riser, I sort of went through the breakup blues or whatever for like 4 months. Whatever I started writing wound up being about a school teacher who has 2 young daughters. It was very hard for me to let go. It was a lot of fun to write that book.
It was. And are you working on anything right now?
I just finished a story collection, and one of the stories in it is based sort of loosely on this time when I was in my 20s and living in New York City and working as an office temp. And one day, due to like laundry crisis and hangover error, I wore a bridesmaid's dress to my temp job. And then like 10 minutes into it, I realized how hilarious it was. And I spent the whole day calling people saying like, guess what I'm wearing? And my friend Mary took the subway like 45 stops from Brooklyn to see me actually wearing it. And
a true friend.
We went out to lunch and I remember like when, you know, you had to give it was like a deli and the guy was calling my name and I wasn't paying attention for whatever reason. And he was like, lady in the prom dress, your sandwich is ready. So I wrote a story about that. And even though I'm not a fan of the aging process in general, it's like, as you get older, you do have more stories, more funny stuff happens to you that you can write about.
And I hope eventually we'll care less too, right? Everyone keeps saying I shouldn't give any Fs anymore, but you know, I still do. I still care so much. I think it's, you know, I still have to evolve to that place. You know, I'm working on it. But I love those funny stories. And I'm glad. Do you have any photographic evidence of this? Somebody has.
Of the bridesmaid's dress? Well, everybody's like, was it strapless? And it wasn't. It was a Laura Ashley. It did have very puffy sleeves. It was black with flowers on it. And I remember the bride was super, super insistent that like we would wear the dress again. And I was like, well, I'm wearing it. So, I mean, it was just, I saw it in the morning. I was like, it's a dress. I mean, can you imagine? I'm sure the office called my temp agency and was like, we don't want her again. She's crazy.
You did get to wear the dress again. I do have a number of bridesmaids dresses I did anywhere where the bride promised this one, especially whether it was the peach one with the puffy sleeves or the mint one with the, the two set parts of it, the top and the bottom. And I don't think I've ever worn, I don't know. I think maybe more the modern bride really lets the bridesmaids choose their own dresses, but I'm just proud that you were able to wear your dress again. That's a win. That's a win. And you get a funny story out of it.
Absolutely.
What about influences for you, your favorite writers and who's influenced your writing? You're so funny. You're naturally, clearly having conversations with you. Is that an important part of your process too, and where you find inspiration?
Well, yeah, when I first moved to London when I was 29 with my husband, who was then my boyfriend, and I read, the first two books I read were High Fidelity by Nick Hornby and Bridget Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding. And I thought I died and gone to heaven. I was like, this is the best place in the world. And I always like to write funny things, but somehow those two novels really showed me that you could write a comic novel that was also a literary novel and also had serious points in it. And I can't overstate how much those two books influenced me. And I recently reread Bridget Jones's Diary, and I was like, every comic novel rests on her shoulders. Like, it's so funny. It's so perfect. It was so groundbreaking. We owe a lot. Yeah.
I'm afraid to ask, did you watch the movie? Did you like it? Sometimes when you have a novel you love and they turn it into a movie, it just ruins it. And then I moved to, maybe I shouldn't see the movie.
I didn't see the movie actually for that very reason. Yeah. Okay. Should I have? Would I like it?
I enjoyed it. And it's one of those movies I will go back to because it's thoroughly enjoyable, but because it means so much to, I feel like maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you shouldn't.
Yeah.
I worry about that. I feel like there are very few books that do, or few movies, I should say, that do the book, do service. You know what I'm trying to say? Remember, this is late for me. My brain is like, I'm trying to get the words out, but you understand what I'm saying.
Can I tell you something that my husband said when I told him about how early you get up in the morning? I'm sure gonna like upset you, but my husband is a former MI6 agent. And so that's the way his brain works. And he says that people are at their emotionally, physically most vulnerable at 4 a.m. Wow. So when you interrogate people, when police come to your house and rouse you out of bed and want to interview you at 4 a.m., it's because you're the most vulnerable. I'm like, oh my God, that's you every day.
That's when I start my show.
Yeah.
That's when I read the headlines. They say, good morning, everyone. Welcome to News 4 Today. I'm Eun Yang at 4 a.m. every day.
Oh, wow.
I feel exposed.
I know. I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't tell her, but it was so interesting. And such.
No, I'm going to go tell everyone now at work that we're all a bunch of vulnerable people sitting ducks in the studio at 4 a.m. Anything happens, we toast.
But it's also interesting to me the way that like his mind works, like that's what he thinks of first. Whereas I'm like, oh, I want to write a story about someone who has to get up at 2:15 in the morning.
I will happily answer any questions for you. I feel like the number one thing is people say, do you get used to it? And the answer is always no, because even though I've been doing it for 10 years, it's not natural. And so it hurts every single morning. So that's my answer. Not that you asked, but that's
so
the number one question. Do you get used to it? But I love what I do. And that's the upside. Do you love writing? I mean, I know that seems like a dumb question. Do you love it? Do you feel like it gives you life and joy and affirmation?
I think that almost all writers write because not writing makes them very unhappy. So it's sort of a preventative, but when it's going well and I'm finding a rhythm, and the characters seem real to me, then there's nothing like it. I can't believe it's my job. I feel like the luckiest person in the world.
And I have to say, I admire author. This seems so, like the read was quick and the characters are so vibrant. But I can't imagine putting this book together. I can't imagine developing the characters and knowing who they are and putting the stories together and being funny and being tender and all these things and describing the city. I just don't know how, like, the parts of it move in your brain and then you write down, put together. Do you do sometimes chapters later, or do you do it in chronological order?
I don't write in chronological order, which everyone thinks is like totally bonkers, but I tend to write the funny parts first because that's what interests me. And I think it's also like I'm basically very insecure and I'm afraid people won't read unless there's like a joke every paragraph. So I'm always adding that in. And there's this like famous thing where trial lawyers say it's like 95% preparation and 5% inspiration. And I feel like even though I outline and I know where things are going, there is that 5% where things just happen and I feel they're right and I put them in there. I think I'm a more auditory person than I am a visual person. So I can hear the dialogue, which makes me sound absolutely crazy, but I can hear it. And there was actually a line in Early Morning Riser that Aggie says that was not quite grammatical, and the copy editors kept tagging it. And I was like, but Aggie said that. I heard her say that, and she's going to be mad if I change it because, you know, Aggie's really bossy. And I was kind of scared to do that. But in the end, I changed it because I was like, if everybody's tagging it, it's going to be distracting.
I kept thinking about who would play Aggie in a movie before I thought about Jane or even Duncan, because of the milkmaid, I kept thinking of her creamy skin and her cleavage. And I kept thinking, who would be Aggie? Have you ever thought about that? Is it just
who would?
Who could
I don't know.
You know, I was just thinking about that. So if y'all have any ideas, let me know. Any suggestions? You mentioned those two books, which I read them and I want to read them again now that you mentioned that they were so important. I loved High Fidelity. I remember when I read it, and it's been a long time, but I feel like I cannot wait to read that again. I'm going to try
so good.
Oh, I can't wait to read it again. Are there other books that you reread or go to or just look as almost reference or inspiration?
Well, I'm definitely a comfort reader, and there are certain books that I return to because, you know, they make me feel a certain way and they're very reliable. It's like, you know, when you make cookies or whatever. Although I gave an interview once where I said that I was comfort reading Silence of the Lambs, and I sounded like a budding serial killer. But I recently reread My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. It made me want some staff. I was like, wow, they have a lot of staff. It sounds good. I can tell somebody to bring the minivan around in the morning. But Ann Tyler, I've read all her books so many times, and sometimes I just have to read them to see how beautifully put together they are. And I really like Stephen King. I just think, you know, how Superman was born on another planet and brought here as a baby. I feel like maybe that was Stephen King because he's so creative. He's so talented, so prolific. You know, what more can you say about Stephen King? Well, I guess you could say lots more about him, and also the things that he says about writing are very interesting to me. So, and Heartburn by Nora Ephron is like literally every time I mention it, including probably tonight, I'm like, oh, I'll go read it again. Like I never tire of reading it. It's the most amazing book.
Thank you. I love all the suggestions. I feel I have to go read. I was love to hear what other authors are, what they've read and what they go back to. What about appearances? Do you feel like you will be ready to go back and I'm sure you've in your past have interesting experiences at bookstore appearances. Is that something you're looking forward to, or that you're happy that you don't have to do?
I guess it's a little mixed. When on my book tour for Standard Deviation, I went to this bookstore where the stage that we were supposed to be on was sort of like chest high. So the first 5 minutes of the event were me struggling to get on the stage. And later I saw that there were stairs at the back, but in my nervousness, I never saw them. So I'm sure everyone in the audience was like, she's just going for it. And then, yeah, there was the woman who said the thing about drinking gin straight from the bottle. And there was also an event where I was reading with another author, and the woman said, oh, the other author comes from a large loving family, is about to have a baby, and Katherine lives alone with 3 dogs. Yeah. And I was like, I am actually married and I do have 2 children. And she's like, but it's true about the dogs. And I was like, well, yeah, I guess it is.
And are you looking forward to going back?
Back to in-person things?
Yeah. Or book appearances especially.
Yeah. It's I've never had one where no one comes. Everyone tells me that will eventually happen, but so far I've been lucky. Although I did go to one event, and the only person who came, I don't know if you know the author Jennifer Close. She wrote Girls in White Dresses.
Yeah.
She's a friend of mine, and her mom came to show me her new handbag. And I was like, all right, I'm cool with this. This can be the event.
It counts.
And then like a minute after 7, 20 people came in the auditorium, and I was like, oh, I have to do the event. And I stood up and my mind went blank, and I don't carry notes. So the first minute was me going, let me think here for a second. So yeah, there's almost always a good story from every single.
No notes.
I do notes now after that, but before that I didn't.
That's impressive. We have 2 suggestions, by the way, for Aggie: Rosamund Pike, which is a good one, and Kirsten Dunst. So
I like Kirsten Dunst.
Those are 2 great suggestions. I like that. Thank you. So I know we could crowdsource. Then we'll have to do Jane Duncan. We're going to do the whole movie, Jimmy, and someone that's going to pick this up, and we'll watch it on Netflix.
Oh, well, I told you the story already, but it's good that earlier in my book tour, I did a Zoom event with a split screen, and the other author was talking about her Netflix deal, and I could see how unpleasant and jealous my face was through her whole thing, even though her book is wonderful. She deserves it.
I just don't know how that happens. I wish I knew, because I would make it happen for you, but I don't know how there's so many novels I've read, and some of them get turned into things on Apple Plus or Netflix or Prime or whatever it is. And some books will never, ever turn it. And I don't know what this is, because the author's choice, or someone didn't get connected properly, or the book is too special, or who knows? I don't know. And then there's some books like The Goldfinch. I heard the movie was so bad that they should have never even turned it into. They spent all this money and it flopped, and they lost money on it. So who knows how that process works? If anyone knows.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm gonna, can I jump in for one second?
Yes, please.
Before we start talking to other people, I would just like to share with you, Katherine, that among the quirky people that we see on a daily basis, which is kind of a lot, but I've got a character for you, which is a woman who came in a few weeks ago, and she seemed not quite like a normal shopper. I knew there was something up, and then a customer said something's happening up the front. By the time she fled quickly after I approached her and I was trying to see what was happening, and she left quickly with her suitcase. But I could go back to our camera and see afterwards that what she had taken, because I could tell she took something, what she had stolen was she had taken your book out of the window and stole only the dust jacket. Folded it up. We can see it all on camera. She folded it up and put it in her pocket and left with her suitcase, and leaving us a bare book, which my husband gladly took us his copy of the book and read. Today, Tara called me and said, you got to hear this. We call them our retails, the tales that happen every day in retail. The retail today was that she was making a sale to a customer who then said, what was that? And Tara looks and realizes something has happened at the front of the store. And the same woman, although Tara wasn't there the first day and was saying, I'm not sure if it was the same person. I'm like, well, I think we can agree. It's the same person, a woman with a suitcase, stole the sign. We'd made a poster size sign about tonight's event. And she had taken that same woman off of the window. So I'm just kind of, I'm offering her as a character, and I'm also saying you might be a little concerned about what's happening.
I wonder if she's going to send me a package.
I don't know. She doesn't look like the most capable of citizens, but yeah. Anyway, I'll turn the floor back over. But
I
just
love that now.
Yeah, Anna, we'll have to swap stories. I can only imagine the people you have encountered in your career.
The retails from 30 years. There are quite a lot. And as Tara said, she wanted to tell the other woman who saw it happen and said, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. She wanted to say, that is not even slightly the most
right.
thing.
Doesn't even scratch the surface.
Yeah.
My goodness. Katherine, I hear you have a funny story about something that happened on an airplane and a compromising position. I'd like to hear this story, please.
Well, it actually happened on the same book tour. It was actually the day after the Jennifer Close's mother's pocketbook event. I was flying back to DC, and I boarded the airplane, and there was kind of an elderly man sitting in the aisle seat, and he said, can you climb over me, because my seat was in the window. So I thought he had limited mobility, so I was like, sure. And then he got up twice to do, like, I was like, so I just was tricked into giving this man a lap dance. Is basically, yeah. I tried to think of another interpretation, and I couldn't.
This needs to be in a book, right? I mean, that's
I guess, yeah.
The encounters on airplanes, the poor behavior we've seen of passengers in those last couple of years is outrageous. And I don't know if it's because we're talking about it more, or people have just reached their stress levels to the point where they can't handle it, and they're just behaving in ways that I just feel so badly for the flight attendants and the pilots to have to manage.
That's what I think too.
Yeah, you have to be in an airplane and fly this thing with passengers, and now you got to deal with crazies on the plane, which is nuts. And no personal space, and people's feet over the armrest, and all of it. It's just nuts. What about gifting books? Now, do you give your own books as gifts? Do you like to receive? I think it would be intimidating if I decided that I wanted to give you a book as a present because you're an author. I love receiving books as gifts, and I like the hard copy. My friend told me to get a Kindle, and I understand why people like Kindles, but I need to be able to flip pages. And I know I'm not alone in that.
I thought I would have that problem with Kindles, but I've grown to used to it.
Okay.
And I can't even remember anymore whether I read something on Kindle or in an actual book. And I thought that's a distinction, a line that would stay with me forever. But I do like to give people books, and I'm very bossy. I think all authors, and certainly all bookstore people, are very much like, this is what you need to read. It will change your life. And when I first started dating my husband, my stepchildren were like 13 and 15. And I gave my stepson some Stephen King. He loved Stephen King right away. That became our thing. That was perfect. And my stepdaughter, I gave her this book by Norma Klein, and it was a young adult book. And I remembered loving it, but I didn't really remember what it was. I didn't really remember it like chapter by chapter. And it turned out to have this very explicit sex scene in it. So my stepdaughter takes it back to boarding school and passes it around to all the girls so they can read this one particular scene. And then, of course, some girl gets caught with it and says, by the headmistress, and says that she got it from my stepdaughter, and my stepdaughter says she got it from me. So my husband and I had to be on like a conference call with the headmistress while she read this extremely graphic sex scene aloud. And then at the end, of course, I'm like, but I think what we can take from this is that the girls have discovered the joy of reading. Like, it's been, we could look at it as a positive experience. And it just still stands out as one of the most horrible days of my life. And
Can I ask you I'm going to ask you a question as a reader and as a mom.
sure.
I have a reader who is a voracious reader. I hate, it seems so cliche, but some teachers have said, listen, if it's too mature, he'll put it down. And sometimes as a mother, feel a little, is that too far reaching? Should I have a little bit more control? Especially, and I'll be honest, especially the sex parts. And maybe when I think you're reading, it's not as bad, but your imagination can be greater than anything you see on the screen. So I worry about letting him read anything he wants. Even when I remember like, oh yeah, I think that is a really great book. I really enjoyed the story, but there was a few graphic sex scenes.
But I mean, I think we all read Flowers in the Attic
We did.
at like age 10 or some.
Reading that book.
Yeah.
Traumatized me.
But also, like, it's so great. It's so memorable.
It was amazing.
And it was always like well known in my town that like the Judy Blume books, she talked a lot about sex, so they were always checked out at the library. And Wifey was like the holy grail of you if you could ever find it at the library, except for my mom, who was really clueless and was like, if you want to buy a book, dear, here's $5. So I always had all the books that I want. But I have to say that in 2020, when Zendaya won the Emmy for Euphoria, that I hadn't heard of the show. So I Googled it and it said a show about teens and drug use. So I was like, we should watch this. So my husband and I watched it with my younger son. My older son was blissfully off at work. And, it's a very explicit show. And we just got like quieter and quieter and took up less and less space. And when it was over, I was like, I'm really sorry. And Hector was like, don't ever mention it again. I never want to talk about it again. And I was like, I'm so sorry.
I am scared of that show. I will not watch it. I'm afraid because I've read about it and I heard how intense it is. And even though as a mother of teens myself, I should eyes wide open, but I don't know. It seems like the world is stressful enough. I can't imagine bringing myself to watch it unless I guess if it's that good, I should try. And I do love Zendaya so much. She's so great.
It's very good. Although I did read this review of it recently where it said it's ironic that it's a show about teenagers that no parents would ever let their teen watch. And I sent that by text to my younger son, who was like, yeah, except for you. So,
I don't know. It's right. But I appreciate your answer about the books.
Yeah.
That's what most of a couple of his English teachers whom he really loved said the same thing. That when I asked them, they said, I would say if he's mature enough to ask to read something that he'll put it down if it's too much. I'm like, okay.
Can I jump in really quickly?
Yes,
so we don't miss Jen's question. And I just want to say, while Anna was telling the story about the woman stealing the sign today, I was trying to mollify my very anxious dog who I'm just feeding treats now. And then I just decided that I needed to get the sign back. So can you imagine me screaming out of our front door to this kooky woman with huge suitcases and just saying, ma'am, I need that sign back, ma'am. I'm going to need that sign back. And she just grumbled at me and like trotted off to Wisconsin Avenue. But we take loss prevention very seriously at Proper Topper, even.
I guess.
Even if it's a sign. I did want to just call attention to Jen's question. You do such a lovely job of balancing humor and sadness. How do you know if you've gone too far in either direction? Good.
There is a chapter in the middle of Early Morning Riser where it's during community week and people are visiting this classroom from different professions and like explaining what they do. And that was originally like 10 pages longer because I was having so much fun bringing people on to say funny things. And I knew even as I was writing it that my editor was going to cut those pages, and she did. So it's hard for me to cut something funny, but it's you have to like leave, you have to take something away so what's there can shine, I think.
And you start with, right, I think that's the hardest part is can't imagine having to cut out. I want to read those pages. I don't know if she would send those to me. I remember those scenes. I love those. Okay, so it's 6:54, and first of all, thank you everyone for joining us for this wonderful conversation. Katherine, you are as funny as the pages on your book, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it, and I can't wait to read your next work. Can you tell us, do you have time, and if you do, what you're reading yourself right now, currently?
I am reading Hilda Wolitzer's story collection today, A Woman Went Mad at the Supermarket. My editor recommended it for me, saying that there was a story in there about the pandemic and losing her husband to COVID. And I read it and it was just so amazing and heartbreaking, but so good that I was like, oh, now I have to read the whole book. I couldn't possibly just stop at one story. So that's a great book. And the story that I usually tell about when recommending books is I went to the University of Kansas, and about maybe a year ago, Facebook popped up this little like thumbnail of somebody said, person you might know. And immediately I had a sort of flashback of being at the University of Kansas, being at a party in my dorm, drunk, and getting on the elevator. And this guy was on the elevator, and I sat behind him in history, and I said, you have really beautiful handwriting. And he looked super scared, and he got off at the next floor, even though I'm sure that wasn't his floor. So I friended him on Facebook, and we reconnected, and he had his debut collection of poetry come out in June. It's called Worldly Things. His name is Michael Kleber Diggs. And even if poetry is not normally your thing, these are so good and they're so funny, but they're also like very sad and political, and they're everything you could want. But I'm like, well, so college is still enriching my life, is the lesson here. Was like, I would never have known that otherwise. So
that's a great. Did he remember you did you remind him of the elevator story?
He said that he was like, you look very familiar. We think maybe we were in another class together, but I don't know. I only had that one very vivid flashback, but maybe there were others.
Thank you for those recommendations. I can't wait to get all these books. And again, thank you, Katherine, for your time. And I'll turn it over to you if you have any last words before we say goodnight.
I just really want to thank you guys so much. I'm sorry, am I talking over? Did you turn it over to me, Anne?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, okay. Thank you so much, Anne, you were just a sparkling host of this. And the stories were so funny, Katherine. I could listen to you guys all night. Thank you so much. That really, in addition to it being such a funny and wonderful book, this conversation just lifted me up. And that is just, I think we all need that right now. And thank you so much. There was a line in this book. There were so many great stories and great lines and things that reminded me of funny people in my life. It's nice to remember that. But I really loved a line where Jane had said something kind. She said something kind to Jimmy, and she said it made him happy. And she realized how easy it was to make him happy and how easy it really is to make most people happy. And why didn't she do it more? And I thought, wow, that's something I'm going to think of frequently because it really is true. And so thank you for that. And thank you for all of the laughs. And I hope that we get to see you in person, maybe one of these days soon. And I hope to see you in person. And thank you, all of you who joined tonight.
Thank you.
Really, really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Katherine. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. Be kind.
Good night. Take care.